Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of the Jeffrey Sapon podcast. Today is just me and just me and you, and we'll be going over our end of year review, kind of looking at all the lessons that I learned in 2025, talking about them. I'll be using the clips, so a lot of the clips that I've kind of done over the past year, and kind of reflecting on some of those conversations that we've had and see if there's any thoughts that I can share, any thoughts that mean a lot to share. So yeah, let's get straight into it. First off is the conversation that I had with Andre at the beginning of the year. The clip is called Setting Goals as Adults. And I think in this conversation, we kind of just talked about our goals for the year, what we wanted to do, some of the things we wanted to accomplish. And it's really, really interesting looking back now, because obviously back then, I had no idea how the year was going to turn out. I had no idea the difficulties that I was going to have to overcome. So yeah, it was good. I think in the video I said that I wanted to put out a poetry book. That did not happen, but that is still in the works, so make sure you look out for that. But I think a lot of the stuff that I talked about, expanding the podcast, bringing more professors on, becoming better at the production aspects of it, I think over the course of the year, I really, really like coming to my own in that. I've really tried to do that intentionally. I think what's important about setting goals, and I think what I learned from setting goals last year, is to understand the person you want to be rather than the goals that you want to set. Because I think setting all the goals was good, and it was good for me to have something to work towards. But a lot of the times this year, there were so many things that were happening in my life that was completely separate from the goals that I was setting, from professional goals or the podcast goals. And I think it's more important to think about what kind of person do you want to be at the end of the year rather than what goals you want to set. But I think that conversation was brilliant. It was a really good conversation for me to kind of like have that perspective. It was the first time I had let someone interview me on the podcast. So if you go check it out, you notice that Andrew's asking the questions and I'm kind of answering the questions. That was a new experience, but I thought that was important to just kind of change that dynamic for that conversation. All in all, setting goals as an adult is always difficult because there's so many things that are out of our control, but we have to balance it and we have to kind of make room for it. And I learned this year that you have to be able to adapt. You have to adapt. You have to trust yourself. You have to set big goals for yourself, but understand how in the moment you're feeling, and you always check in with yourself. It's been a very emotional, contemplative year, I'm already an emotional person. I'm a poetic person, but I think this year has given me a lot of time to reflect and to kind of zero in on the goals that I want. And the reason that I want those goals. So if I was to do this again, I think I'll set more like human goals, more emotional goals, how I want to have the relationship with myself, kind of the voice in my head, and how I approach how I look at my challenges and how I look at my goals. I think that's far more important for the next year. But anyway, yes, that was the first one. Second one is why do you train so hard? So this is a clip that I had of Pierre at the beginning of the year. This was my first BBJ podcast, and that was a brilliant conversation. I love jiu-jitsu. Anyone who is a fan of this podcast would know that I'm a big fan of jiu-jitsu, and I'm trying as much as I can to bring on more jiu-jitsu practitioners to show why we love the sport, because I think the sport is incredible. The reason why I really like this one is because it's just taught me the level of effort that is required. I mean, Pierre works at this place. He trains 7 times a week. He's completely committed to this, and you can tell the amount of effort that it takes, and is reciprocated by how much he gets better and how much he trains. I think that is something you can apply to at any course of life. I think I realized that obsession is really important especially when you're young, because there's so many distractions. There's so many things to distract you from one goal. But I think a man must have a quest. Anyone must have a quest. You must have a quest that you work towards, because that will, in the light of all these things that happen in life, that will give you some direction. And I think that's so important, to have some direction in all the storms that come in life. I think the reason I really resonated with this conversation was that it gave me perspective about the effort that was required. I remember watching this thing by Chris Williamson years ago, and it was you just haven't put that much output. I think it was between Chris and Hormozy, who were just talking about, you need to change your level of output. It's not about the quality of the thing you're doing, especially at that early stage. It is about the quality later on, but when you're looking at something early on and you're thinking, why isn't this growing? Why am I not getting better? Most of the time it's because you're just not putting enough effort into it. Most of the time it's because you're not putting as much output into it. And so hearing that conversation with Pierre and him talking to me about how he trains every day and what he does outside of that, how he was always thinking about jiu-jitsu, and me seeing that, because I train with this guy, me seeing that has also made me like realize, okay, cool, I need to step my level of output up. I need to try to do it every single week, and I've tried to do it every single week. The weeks that I haven't is because it's been out of my control, but I think having that level of understanding about what you do and a level of clarity is so important, and that's a big thing I learned in that conversation. Third one, becoming a mother with Nia. This was such a wholesome conversation. This is probably the most wholesome conversation I think I had throughout. This was the first time that Nia was on. I've had her twice because she's so incredible. But yeah, the first time I had her on, and the baby was like running around, was in a couple of shots. It was such a beautiful conversation because it was, one of the things I'm trying to do is tell people stories. And one thing I'm trying to do is to get people to understand different perspective. I never really explicitly say what the podcast is about, because I kind of feel like that'll put me in a box. I don't want to be put in a box. I know that's terrible for the algorithm, it's terrible for marketing, it's terrible for branding, but this is a human thing. I like to say this is something I heard, but I like to say it's a self-biography, masquerading as a part of a podcast. It's just something that I'm trying to show about the perspective that I have, or the perspective the people around me have, and bring you in, and the conversations that I'd be having with these people. And this is one of those times, sitting down with Nia, hearing her story. She's a young mother. She understands really well the reasons, that I think a lot of people my generations have fears about that, having that step. She articulates it very well. She can really talk about an issue and really get people to sympathize and relate to the conversations they're having, even if they're not a mother. And so, yeah, having her on, hearing her perspective, hearing her story, then having her on again the second time, talking about some of the issues that are plaguing young mothers, and also just like women, in general. I think, yeah, she's a fantastic spokesperson. And yeah, I know I'm not trying to put too much pressure on her to be a spokesperson, but yeah, she's a fantastic spokesperson for her community. And I think a lot of people relate to her, and a lot of people feel a lot of people feel seen. A lot of people relate to her, and a lot of people feel seen by what she does. And so, yeah, the biggest lesson I learned from that was to do more of that. That there's so many stories in between the cracks. I have my perspective, have my program that I want to follow, but when I have a chance to speak to someone like that and platform people like that, I think I'm always going to take it, because at the end of the day, it is a human podcast, and I think human beings relate to stories that they can understand, and this is one of those stories. 4, self-actualization before love. So this whole conversation with Kieran was about love, was just us kind of like looking at it from perspective. I think I read The Art of Loving. The Art of Loving, you guys should check out that book. It's a really good book. Forgetting who it's by, but I'll find that out. Yeah, we read The Art of Loving, and then we just wanted to have a conversation about it, some of the stuff that were in it, looking at love from a different perspective. But the idea of self-actualizing before love, I think I'll continue to analyze love. I think love is such a pervasive and misunderstood emotion in our current society, just because we're looking at it from a perspective which is romantic. But I think there's so much, there's that isolationist that's going on here. There's so much things that can be taken out, or so much things that can be like pulled out from that idea of love. And there's so many different perspectives about it. I think I'm trying to foster that conversation by bringing on people here and asking them about love. I try to do that as many times as I can in conversations that I think I like even relatively, close to it, because I feel like, I think the way you see things is from many different sides. The elephant has to be looked at from many different sides, to understand it. And self-actualization before love is a very important concept. I think for me, I found that this year, I've had to put love on the back burner. I try to distance my love life from the podcast, not just because I want to keep something private for myself. And I think the people that are in those situations, they shouldn't be, it shouldn't be a public thing. I think there are certain things that, need to be kept separate and need to get kept private for the value of what they are and for the people that are involved. But I think understanding it from a conceptual point of view, I will always try to do. And I think, this conversation is about trying to put yourself ahead, trying to like think about yourself before you go into love is just something I think we all know, we all intrinsically feel. And I think there's a balance there, because this generation might do that a bit too much, but we kind of put ourselves, our individual self above the collective or above the partnership. That's something I'm trying to work out, something I'm trying to figure out. Number 5, what people don't understand about Gaza. So this is a conversation I had with Gamma. And this was incredible. I want to have Gamma on again soon, because this was the first time I kind of stepped into the world of politics. But like I've always said, I wanted to do it from a human perspective. So I did it with someone that I knew was doing something about it and not just talking about it on social media. That was actually out there doing the runs, being vocal about how she felt, being vocal about what was going on. I think the reason why I try to, stay clear from this conversation is because I just don't understand enough. To be hand on heart, I just don't understand enough about what's going on. There is something that's very clear, obviously with Gaza, which is why it was great to have Gamma on, to have that conversation of her, to ask her some of the questions, for us to kind of both raise some questions and, talk about how we could help, realistically as people here. Yeah, I think I'll try to do more on that. I try to do more, not just on Gaza, but on Sudan, on Congo, on all these things that are like, part of our generation and part of the problem of our generation. I think the podcast to me is a way for me to talk to people in my generation and understand their struggles, understand what is ailing them, how do we fix it, what are we struggling to understand, how do I bring on someone that this is their expertise, and talk and ask the questions and be the surrogate for the audience, be the surrogate for the young audience, and try to break down some of these concepts and some of these institutions. But I think what's happening in Gaza, the tragedy of what's happening in Gaza, is definitely one of them that I want to shine more light on. But not just this one, the conversation I had with Afia, also in Sudan. I think these conversations are always difficult to have, because I believe everyone that I know feels the same way about it. But so how do I bring something new to the conversation? How do I not just talk about it from an outside perspective? Because then what do I know? I know how I feel. I know how tragic it is, but it's not adding anything to the conversation. So I try to come at it from a perspective of, like, okay, if I could talk to someone who actually knows a few more than me, how do I prize out some of that information and give it to my audience? So I'll continue to do that, because I think it's important. I think, when you look back 10 years from now, 15 years from now, you're going to ask yourself the question, what did you do? How did you try to make a difference? What is the point of all this? And a lot of the times I ask God to give me some guidance about how to move forward with this podcast, how to have the confidence and the bravery to have some of those difficult conversations. And this was one of those times that I had a clarity about what to do. So I'm very, very glad I had this conversation. Number 6, I think. Yeah, number 6. Spirituality and psychosis. So this was my first conversation with Maya. Absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. It's one of my favorite ones throughout the year. Because of the way we went in the conversation and the topics, I believe there's a ceiling, there's a glass ceiling of acceptable conversations you're allowed to have. And psychosis and spirituality are not in that. Most people don't want to have that conversation. Most people feel very awkward about having a conversation. But when I first spoke to Maya, she was like, we got to have that conversation, because that was something that she'd personally been through and that she had perspective on. And I was just curious about it. And so sitting down with her and having this conversation was super enlightening. Getting to really understand her perspective, go into her world, walk through her mind, walk through her experiences, and then relate, because I think that's so important. I just want people to feel seen. That's literally all I care about. I want people to feel seen. I want people to feel like they want someone on this podcast and be like, I'm like this person. I relate to this person, because I relate to almost every person that I have on here. So I know if I do it, then you're more likely to. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of conversations that aren't being had in the mainstream because we put all these things to celebrities, and we look at celebrities and look how to relate to them. But I never thought that made any sense. You can't relate to celebrities, but you can relate to the person who's just like you. And so I try to find loads of the people, a lot of people that I have on it aren't celebrities. They might be doing something, creative or sports, or maybe, a thinker in some way. But most of the people out here are just people. I mean, they're just like me and you. They do something on the side. They're trying to achieve goals. They've got dreams and aspirations. They like around my age. I think that's important. Because it kind of helps that reliability. And I think, if I show that this person can go through it, then you can go through it too. And I think this conversation, Maya, is a perfect example of that. And it really encapsulated that. It was a great conversation, great answers. She allowed me to be inquisitive and really like go there with the questions. And so I'm very, very grateful for that. Number 7. This was the conversation I had with Dan. It's called The Role of Leaders in Conflict. So this whole conversation was about like more than just this clip. It was about war. It was like, looking at past war. I believe we're looking at the Greeks. We're looking at the Greek, Peloponnesian War, and looking at like how it came about, what the players involved, making connections to then and now. I love these conversations. I absolutely love these conversations. I think looking at our past and guiding our future based on that, or understanding our future based on our past, is super important. It's a skill that we don't do enough as a generation. We've kind of like let go of the past and we're moving forward. And I think there are some aspects of that which is obviously good. There's so much bigotry and stuff that we've left behind. But when it comes to knowledge, we definitely need to go back and understand, because we're repeating the same thing. We're in danger of keep repeating the same thing. And I think, this conversation of Dan was super important, because both of us were just really in that space, in that mental space of being able to look at these things and, be curious about history, be curious about the events that happened, and then look at it and be like, okay, yes, these are some of the things that are similar. These are some of the things that, might be happening again. And I think, I feel like we don't realize that until it's too late most of the times. History is doomed to repeat itself, as the saying goes. But if we can understand it, then we can maybe understand the value of us speaking up in certain situations. I think we might understand, our generation might have a voice, might understand our voice, but we don't understand the gravity of some of these actions, or maybe the inevitability of some of these actions, how they're going to always happen, because this is how human beings tend to end up adding up to. I don't know. Like I say, I am not the person to be making moral judgments on people. I just think each individual has to look at themselves in the mirror. And I think, this conversation is about the role of leaders in the conflict in the past, but also now, really gave me perspective and really made me understand how to move forward and how to look at some of the events that are happening now. Next up is don't study chess, study yourself. This is a conversation I had with Lance. Absolutely incredible. This whole conversation was incredible, as if every conversation as you're beginning to learn. But this was really good because we looked at chess from the perspective of how to take chess and apply it to life. This is one of those applicable conversations, and I'm trying to have more of, where you take an idea in society, or you take a subject, or like, for example, and I love doing that with sports, take sports and then look at how sports can apply to life, because I think these are all the same things. I focus on poetry and jiu-jitsu, but I'm trying to branch out, and this is one of those things. Looking at chess is a way to plan your life, to see how some things, some decisions you can actually make back. It's about being patient. Was very, very important, very applicable kind of idea. I think Lance is a great communicator, absolutely fantastic communicator, has such a deep understanding about chess that can apply to life. It's also spiritual, so understands how to relate to human beings. So like a fantastic person, but also fantastic episode, because it really... it was good. It was great getting to know Lance, and it was great, sitting and losing that chess. I lost very badly. But it was great meeting and having this conversation and then playing and understanding a little bit more about chess, because I've always had an interest, but I've never spoken to someone and asked them how can they relate this to the life that we live in, how can they relate this to, what we're all going through. And yeah, I think if you're ever stuck in life, whoever needs some guidance or some like understanding about some of the decisions you're making and how to, use chess as a metaphor, this is the episode for you. So 100% check it out. I learned so much from it myself. Number 8 or 9, I don't know, whichever it is, Jeff, figure it out. Number 8 or 9. Why Do We Laugh? With Professor Sophie Scott. So this was my second conversation that I had with a professor. My first one was with Tim. And then, this was my second one. Tim was actually one of my professors. So this was my first non-professor, someone I didn't know. I reached out. She spoke to me. Absolutely fantastic conversation. Absolutely fantastic conversation. Again, this comes back to what I was talking about, how in the future I'm trying to make the podcast more applicable, but like find a balance. I want to find a balance between what can we apply to our lives, but like make the topic interesting. And so understanding the neuroscience of laughter and emotions, that's such an important thing because we all have it. We all share that in common. I think going down to the scientific level and going down beneath the head, below the head, as they say, and embodying in these emotions and trying to understand where they come from and also how they affect different things, like understanding how it affects grief is super, super important. Understanding how we develop it, as a species, This was a really good conversation. I think Professor Scott is a fantastic communicator. Again, she understands human beings on a very, very deep level, understands her science, and is obviously an expert at what she does. And finding the balance between expert knowledge, human beings, and understanding identity, understanding emotions was a brilliant arc, and I'm glad I had this conversation with her because I think I'm trying to do more of that. Take emotions and try to dissect emotions, because coming back to what I said before, there's a lot of things we don't understand, we take for granted. Why we laugh, why we cry, why we have all these different emotions as human beings. And this is my journey to understand myself, but I think in that process I can bring some value to the audience as they're coming on that journey. And so this is one of those conversations I'm glad I had. I'm glad it gave me perspective when I was able to relate on that human level, but I also learned a lot throughout this conversation. Number 9, I think. I have no idea what number I'm on, by the way, but number 9. Artist and athlete. Get comfortable living between identities. So this was my second conversation I had with Chloe. Amazing, incredible. I mean, as the title suggests, it was really just the intersection of those two things. That encapsulates a lot of what I'm trying to approach with this conversation. I think there is no need to pick one. And I think I said this in the conversation. There is no need to pick one identity. There is no need to feel like you have to now be put in a box. That was never comfortable with me. That was never something I wanted to do in my life. I always wanted to see what was out there. I always wanted to improve myself by following my curiosity and following my interest. And I've always been an athlete ever since I was a kid. I've always just wanted to do sports. I've always been out playing sports and doing all these things. But as I've also gotten older, I've also become more intellectual, more artistic, more creative. And I think, moving into my poetic, phase has been super important for my development. And so imagine understanding all of these things. Imagine trying to balance all of these things. I think it's, you have to get comfortable living between the identities. You have to get comfortable understanding that you don't really know yourself and you're discovering yourself. And life is a lot about discovering that, the discovery of self, rather than just about, staying in one place, and trying to hold on to the identity. And so having a conversation with Chloe, who's exactly the same, her journey's been mirrored. I think she's also more of an artist. She's had more of that art, that creative experience. Seeing that and seeing her rediscovery of jiu-jitsu, a sport we both love, I think was super important. I think this conversation in total, and again, all of these kind of lessons, I think, check out this conversation. Of course, I'm going to be check out every episode, which you should, by the way. These episodes are very, very good. But yeah, especially if you relate to these clips, I would say, because the clips is embedded into a whole wider conversation, and it flows in the narrative arc of that conversation of getting to know the person. There's so much stuff they say that is relatable. So yeah, I think, yeah, again, this conversation is so important. I think the theme of it, which is like get comfortable between different identities, or something I had to embody, like more than just understand conceptually. That's something I had to really embody and really live out throughout the year, because life just kept throwing to me new things, and it was like, okay, can you handle this? Can you handle this? And I had to with myself grow the confidence to do it. And so yeah, having this conversation was a big way for me to kind of bookend that chapter of my life. The next one, formal versus informal education, what really shapes us. So this was my episode of Jonas. Again, I had fantastic conversations about education, fantastic conversations about the responsibility that we have towards educating ourselves. Yeah, it basically encapsulates my journey of this podcast, because I'm trying to, for myself, build myself an extracurricular activity where it's like, okay, can I research these conversations? Can I research these professors? Can I speak to people in my industry or outside my industry, or where is adjacent? Find commonalities, find lessons we both learn, share that for an audience, reflect on that, learn from that, grow. And so that's me, putting myself in a position to learn. And that was what this conversation is about. It's like education does not stop at uni. This idea that education must have an expiry date is ridiculous. Maybe because we feel about how education is presented to us, we don't really like it. I understand that. I understand that perspective where we don't like education, so we go, okay, no, this is not for me. And it's like, okay, cool, but I feel like there's so much growth to be done, and I think Jonas really, really touched on that really well throughout this whole conversation about the responsibilities on you. There are third places out there as well. There are other places out there for you to go out and informally learn, and I've been a part of some of those places, professionally. But I think, just going out and also just being in around these people, you find commonalities with them, you find interest in them. And it was really, really important to have that, because again, coming back to what we're talking about, the variability is important. I feel like a lot of the people watching this are going to be like me and Jonas, who want to learn, who want to educate themselves. And so, yeah, finding someone out there who's doing that and sharing that human conversation. It's not to get too caught up in the abstract of it, but like the human journey of that. It was important. And yeah, so check out that episode. Next one, how we lose time without noticing. This was a conversation I had with Stephen. This was pretty recent, actually. So now we're getting to really recent. By the way, this has been all in chronological order. I did not say that to the beginning. So if you're like half an hour through this and I realize, again, this was such an important idea. We both said it in there. There is so much lost time, so much dead time, as I call it, that we get caught up in as a society. And I understand why. There's that boredom, there's that level of like inertia, where like life is just like, is not moving, it's just like, what are you going to do? And then we fill that time up with all these different distractions. And, everyone complains about doom scrolling, but it's like, we kind of wanted it. That's why these companies created it. That's why these companies kept pouring money into it, and do where it's gotten, because it's something we wanted. And I think you have to take agency in your life in order to stop that. And, going through with someone who very much like me understands that and very meticulously structures their time and tries to reduce as much procrastination as possible was an important discovery for me. I'm also learning about some of the stuff that I, waste time doing, and about like, I think like as you get older, not even as you get older, as you continue to do stuff that you like, you start to see the dead time, you start to see the repercussions of the dead time, because you might put something out that you're not happy with, and you go, wait, actually, if I took more time at this time beforehand, researching or beforehand, looking at these ideas and go over them, the product would have been better. And so like, if you really care about what you're doing, you start to look at all that time beforehand and be like, actually, what am I going to spend this time on? I think, that was an important lesson throughout the year. As it's going more and more, and like the level of quality is improved, because I've had to kind of understand that about myself, that I really do care about this, that I really do want to succeed, that I really do want to bring you guys the best product, the best conversations, the best guests, the best research questions, the best productions, like everything. And so that means I have to pour more time into it. And so, yeah, understanding how you lose that time, understanding the pitfalls, understanding the mental conversations you have with yourself about reasons why you waste time on all these things was super important, because you have to face it. You have to really look at it in the eye and really like face that part of yourself that wants to procrastinate. And yeah, and I think once you do that, you get some understanding out of it. You get some clarity and some direction and some motivation, whatever you call it. It helps you, get rid of all the chaff and, focus on the goal and move forward that way. Next one. Can art survive without capitalism? This is from the conversation I had with Shannon. And again, this was my most surprising conversation throughout the whole time. I can't remember what I went into. I think I went into it thinking, okay, we'll have a conversation about art. We'll have a conversation about painting, about how people can, figure out how to paint, about anime. She's a fantastic artist, by the way. I really like, again, sidebar, this is one of the things I really enjoy about my role, about my I couldn't even call it a job, but about this is that I get to meet people who I really admire as creatives, and just not even just creatives, athletes, creatives, people that I admire. I get to speak to them, we get to communicate, and we become friends because we share a love of something, and then we respect each other. And I think having a conversation with Shannon, we had a long conversation actually, even off the podcast. But yeah, there was so much spirituality, there was so much wisdom that I wasn't expecting, because I sometimes I try to speak to the guests before they come on, but I'd limited for this one. But yeah, coming on and just showing me so much understanding of self, so much, like wisdom, like balance, perspective. It was, I immediately pivoted the conversation that way, and I think at the beginning of that, what she mentioned was the idea of like art, an idea of capitalism, an idea of like not letting it be pulled that way. And that's something I have really felt this year about why do you do what you do? I consider this art. I consider what I do art. I do create poetry. I do perform poems and stuff like that, but I also consider it art because I think there's an art in conversation, there's an art in availability, there's an art in this kind of in-between stage where you're trying to understand what I'm saying and reinterpret it. And then you interpret it based on the context of what I've said before, and all of that is art. But yeah, how do you, take that and fit into a capitalist system, into a YouTube which has got algorithms, into branding, into people with like a minute attention span? And that's something I've really tried to kind of understand and wrestle with. And especially on the social media platforms, I've understood like I have to give to take. I have to give some of the things that I think it's also to do with ego, just like, okay, like as an artist, what are you willing to give in order to get to the point you want to get to? And that's something Stephen helped me with, definitely having a conversation with him, but also Shannon helped me with by the other perspective, which is like, actually, you don't need capitalism. The bad aspects of capitalism is actually something that we don't want to encroach in art. Art is for the people. Art is forgiven. There are parts that I'm going to be like, yes, this needs to be produced in a way which can maximize his potential to reach as many people. But there are conversations I'm going to be like, I don't even care if anyone doesn't watch this. This is for one person who's going to really enjoy this, and I got to do one to do the other, and so balancing that and, extending my reach that could reach that person that it needs to reach. That's the conversation I've had to have with myself. Yeah, so this is a conversation that really helped with that processing. The myth of good AI. I don't even know what number I'm on, but I think I'm nearly there. The myth of good AI. This is the conversation I had with Dr. Arshan. This was one of my favorite conversations throughout the year. I think Dr. Arshan is such a brilliant idealist, like such a brilliant communicator, but such a great at like taking ideas and like extrapolating them and like really like bringing them to earth. And this conversation he mentioned afterwards, it felt like a hip hop, but like a boxing match, where he'd throw it and I'll throw it, he'll throw it and I'll throw it. And I think it was super enlightening for me to kind of take that role and, you know, like be the student, but also have my perspective on what we were talking about. And he was such an intelligent person that it was very, very easy to kind of like just throw these ideas out. And so, yeah, I think I 100% would want to do more of that. And like, you know, the professor conversations is something I I started this year. So that's been a big, big lesson. I'm trying to refine that, get better at that. You know, there's so much production beforehand. There's so much like admin beforehand that I need to get better at. But even on the camera, having a conversation with them, understanding the role between being the interviewer and also being the student in the room, you know, because I want to mimic the dialectic approach when it comes to that conversation where we're both kind of like, you know, circling around on ideas, and obviously they're the experts. So I want them to take the lead and, you know, take us through these ideas. But I have to also be able to, you know, bring it down so they relate to the person that's listening, not like dumb it down, but relate to their experience. And, you know, talking about AI, not from a perspective of like, technology, but also like identity, you know, like what AI means for us as people. How do we identify with these things? You know, how does that affect religion? How does that affect arts? How does that affect, you know, all these things that we hold dear? So all these things that are still prevalent in my topic, in my channel, how do I take these ideas and bring it here and then have that kind of play? And I think it's something I've been getting better at throughout the year, something I've definitely been getting better at, I suppose, the last year. And yeah, I was really, really happy about how this conversation turned out. Okay, last one. Mental health, art, and the struggle to be understood. This was a clip from the conversation I had with Jasmine. And yeah, I think this has been a long year for me. It's been a very long and difficult year. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a very happy person. Oh, I try to be. I'm a very energetic person. I like to take on challenges. I like to take on goals. But this year has been a complete sucker punch to... It's like a haymaker to all of that, because I've had to really develop. I've had to really mature. I've had to really like focus and sacrifice and like, you know, try to, you know, continue that. And mental health has been a big part of that. You know, it's for the first time in a long time. I think for the first time in a long time, I've had to rediscover a lot of stuff about myself. And yeah, I think the podcast itself has been really, really helpful. Just having that continuous weekly kind of consistency where you're like, okay, cool, I know. And then in those moments and you're sharing conversations and you're finding truth about this person and you're relating to, you know, the human being, you know, your problem seems to like just not go a little bit. And then you can take gems from the conversation and bring it back and be like, okay, cool, this is why I do this. And this is why I love this. And I think, yeah, it's been an incredible year. It's been a very, very difficult year for me too. And, you know, we talk a lot about this in this conversation about the struggle to be understood and how artists always find that. And yeah, I think it's always going to be the case. You know, the struggle to be understood is always there. I've tried to understand my feelings. I've tried to understand myself through all of this. As a poet, I have these grand emotions and grandiose romanticisms about some of the stuff that I feel. But as a more rational person, I see the reasons for that, you know, and I'm trying to fix that. You know, I have to have patience in myself. I'm still a young guy. Sometimes I don't recognize that. But yeah, it's about understanding the process, understanding what it's been about, you know, reaching out to friends. You know, I feel like you can isolate yourself a lot if you're not careful achieving goals and trying to strive for something. And consistency comes with, you know, sacrifice. But like what you sacrifice, you have to be careful of. And all of these things I'm bonding up in all the lessons that I've learned. I think that's been the biggest one for me this year, which is why it comes last, because I've been really like understanding that like most important in any endeavor is your mental health, because you're trying to go long. You're not trying to be here the next couple of years. This is a long-term game. Podcasting is a long-term game. 10 years, 20 years to really be really one of the best. And so, yeah, more important to that than anything, it's just your mental health and how you kind of understand your relationship with yourself and the voice in your head. So I think been a big lesson for me this year. And so I'm very, very happy. I had this conversation pretty early on, but I'm happy I've carried on understanding and remembering it. So thank you, Jasmine. Okay, we've come to the end. Thank you for listening. Yeah, like I said, this has been a very difficult year for me. But the podcast has just gone like this. And to everyone who's come on, even the people that I haven't, talked about in this conversation and in this video, you've been incredibly helpful for me, just to kind of figure myself through that, figure out what this podcast means in my head, and every conversation I had refines what the podcast is. And so thank you to everyone, thank you to every professor, thank you to every watcher, thank you to all my friends, thank you to everyone who comments, anything, all of it, everyone who shares. This is just getting better and better every year. And, you can see the difference last year where I had like a few videos in the studio to this year, whereas like right now, like most of the videos in the studio. So that's the production getting better, and the conversations are getting better, and I'm reaching to more people. And so there's professors involved now. And so it's just a exponential growth that I'm trying to keep on doing. So thank you for watching. Thank you for being here on this journey. 2026. We're going to go crush it. We're going to make sure that everything that we do is geared towards the goal of the achieving the goals that we care about and achieving what this podcast means. And so, yeah, like I've said it before, I think it's for you guys to kind of be on this journey with me. So let's keep going on that journey. Thank you. Have a great year. Peace.